Hey folks, Jermaine Sabado. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time, welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. I retired at 51 and I use this as an opportunity to help people understand, number one, how I did it, two, provide access to information that you may not have had, and number three, just inspire you to let you know that if I was able to do it, then there's a high likelihood that most of you should be able to do it, and give you the confidence to go and reach after it. Because I know as soon as you tell people you want to retire early, in a lot of cases, people tell you what you can't do. And today I'm going to switch hats, and many of you know, but some of you may not know, is that when I retired from the field of human resources. I was a chief human resources officer. Finished my career at a small nonprofit organization, but I worked for a couple of large healthcare providers such as Kaiser. I was with DHL for a period of time, and I worked with Dignity Health. And so I've got multi-industry background, and I've worked at large employers. In fact, when I worked with DHL was the second largest employer in the world. And I had responsibility for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and I've worked for the Compass Group and a bunch of other organizations. And I say all that to say I've seen a lot of stuff. And so today I want to talk to you from the standpoint of a human resources professional, because during these turbulent times, we've talked in earlier episodes about the impact of tariffs and economic volatility. But today I want to talk about the employment side of it, because it occurred to me that a lot of us out there want to retire early. I don't think there's a person out there that says, no, man, I don't want to retire early. But there are a lot of us out there that don't believe we can do it because, number one, we just don't have the cash to do it. But number two, because there's so much stuff going on at work that we don't even have stability at work. So it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which says if your basic needs aren't met, then you can't get to the level of self-actualization. And we find ourselves in that situation here and now, particularly with what's going on in the federal government, as well as private employers that want to follow suit. Unfortunately, many of the private employers that don't follow suit, although there are laws that exist, the fact of the matter is if they terminate you, you're probably not going to get your job back, because it's not going to be a matter of reinstating you unless you're in a union and you have certain union rights. But for the most part, they'll pay you out and then you go away. So I want to try to help you prevail in that type of scenario, if that ever exists, or at least understand all the information so you don't get sabotaged somewhere down the road, and that you have the necessary information to push back if you need to, or whatever the case is. I'm going to talk about 6 ways that you could protect yourself during turbulent times at work. So on that note, let's get into it. And number one, request a copy of your employee file. Why do you want a copy of your employee file? We all have coworkers that say, my boss came to me, they gave me a problem. They said, I was a problem at work, or I didn't do something, or I had an issue. And they said, well, it's been a long-standing issue. And then when you look at their personnel file, they don't have any write-ups. They don't have anything there. The managers would come to me and say, we want to terminate this person because they've been a behavioral problem for a period of time. And I say, well, show me the documentation. There is none. So, but without the information, we don't know. As an HR professional, I am the keeper of those documents, but as the employee, you're not. And so you always want to know what's in your personnel file from a disciplinary action perspective. You want to know what your performance appraisals look like, and you want to have copies of all of your performance appraisals. And it's easy enough to say, well, people should keep copies of their performance appraisals, but what are you going to do? Keep them in a file cabinet in the house? Most people don't have file cabinets in the house for performance appraisals. And so I suggest that you get copies of your performance appraisals, and you also get a copy of your training certificates. If something does happen at work, you want to be in a position to be able to demonstrate your competency in certain fields or certain areas of expertise for your next job. And unfortunately, a lot of times when you find yourself in a situation that you use this information, you're not able to use that last job as a reference. So it's hard to get that information. One of the things that's important to understand is that employers are legally required to give you a copy of your personnel file. Now, in some states, they may not be required to give you a copy, but they can have you review it. You could photocopy the documents that you need, but you should always know what's inside of your personnel file. So when they come to you and tell you, hey, I'm a behavioral problem, or hey, I'm late all the time, or hey, I've talked to you about this, Have them prove it. The proof is in the pudding. Show me the documents. Money walks, bullshit runs a marathon. And unfortunately, we run a lot of marathons here in our employers. And please let me know if you've experienced it. And I think most of us have seen that. I've seen it as an HR professional, and I was in a place to fight back against it. But unfortunately, a lot of our HR professionals don't do that either. So get a copy of your personnel file and take copies of the important documents, and those being your disciplinary actions, your performance appraisals, and your training certificates. Number 2, review your policies. Most organizations have an exhaustive list of policies that govern how they run their organization. Most organizations have some regulatory board or a body. They have a board of directors. There's a whole host of people that need to know how a business runs. When I was a healthcare executive, we had the Joint Commission, and you had a CMS and the Center for, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. You have a bunch of different organizations, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health, so on and so forth. And so you had to have policies to show, here's how we run our operation, because if you don't run your operation right, then you run the risk of bad patient outcomes. And in the logistics side, it was the same thing. You want to make sure that you get copies of the policies, and particularly, you want to understand your severance policies, and you also want to understand the practices of how severances are managed, and you also want to look at the eligibility for rehire policies. Let's say an employer's laying you off. They'll give you a severance, and that severance most of the time will equate to a certain amount of weeks or days or whatever of payment for every week that you work there. And a lot of times when you ask them about how do they come up with that, they'll say, well, it's discretionary. In a lot of cases, it's discretionary, but take a look at your policies to see how they manage that. The reason that they give you a severance, and this is really important, the reason that organizations give you a severance is to mitigate the risk of you suing them. They don't give you a severance because they care about you. They give you a severance so you don't sue them, because whenever you get a severance, and please chin check me on this if I'm wrong, when they give you a severance, they also give you another document, and that document is a release of claims. And that release of claims, when you sign that, you're signing your life on the X. And so you just get a box of Newports and Puma sweats. Just kidding. You sign your life on the X, and it basically says that you cannot sue us, or you cannot bring any further claims for anything that happened while you were in our employ. And you were saying that there's nothing here that you need to go to. And you have to sign that in order to get your severance. So nothing is free in this world. It's a quid pro quo. So make sure you understand what those practices are. What's the policy? And a lot of organizations, they'll say it's discretionary. And a lot of organizations it is, but sometimes it's a policy that doesn't sit on your policy database or in your handbook or in your policy file. But if you go to your human resources person and you ask that person, hey, look, if I were to get laid off, what would I get? What's the policy around that? And generally, they'll give you a general idea of what it looks like, because there's 2 things you don't want to have happen. Number 1, you don't want to take an offer where they lowball you just because you think they're giving you the money and that you have to take it. In fact, I had a friend of mine whose wife was laid off, and she took her that release of claims back, and she negotiated a higher severance because she was pregnant. She was laid off for no reason. They didn't give her any notice, and the organization was hiring other people and some of that, which is why I talk about rehire. So she was able to negotiate a higher severance. So my point is don't allow yourself to get caught into that trap and just get taken a lowball severance, because there's always opportunities to bring more. And if there's more risk, there's more severance. If you know that the reason for the layoff is faulty. Now, I will say that in this current climate, there's a lot of people getting laid off and there's a lot of justification for it. But I would rather get laid off and know it was justified than get laid off and then question whether or not it's justified and have to come back later. And then look at the rehire policies. And this is something else that's really important. When you lay people off, you lay off positions that you don't think you're going to have to fill within the next 6 months. For example, Larry, you all know who Larry is, right? Larry is the white guy people think he's funny, a real estate investor who makes a lot of money. Just kidding. But let's say you get laid off and they say, you know what, Sabado, we're going to go ahead and lay you off because we don't need this. We're going to eliminate this position. And then they go 2 weeks later and they hire somebody that's younger for less money. Well, folks, that's illegal. That right there is illegal because they fired me or they laid me off because they wanted to hire a person that looked different that was going to cost less. And generally, it's not the cost less, but a lot of times it's the person that looks different. But, you know, and most states in the U.S. are at-will states. And so you could fire somebody for any reason or no reason at all. But there's a caveat to that reason cannot be discriminatory in nature, and it becomes incumbent on an employer to demonstrate how their methodology for determining that you were the person that was going to get laid off. But if they say they're going to reduce your position, then they hire somebody into your position, then that's a problem. And generally, there's going to be some difference between the two, and that gives you some ability to sue. So you want to make sure that you understand that dynamic, but also understand if they are going to rehire people that were laid off, what's their policy for that? What's their process for that? Most of the work groups that I've worked around, you have groups of people that are friends. And sometimes what will happen is one of the people will get laid off, another person gets laid off, and then they hire one of the people in the group back, and then everybody else in the group is looking at them saying, hey, how come you got your job back and I didn't? So you want to be able to understand what was that methodology, and if something doesn't make sense, you're able to raise your hand and have that conversation. So that's why it's important to understand, just review those policies, understand them. I'm not saying it'll keep your job or anything like that, but what it will do is it'll arm you with the information to know whether or not you've been treated fairly. Number 3, keep personal information personal. I just have this thing. I worked for a lot of years and I met a lot of people. And unfortunately, different people have different motivations. And the one motivation that everybody at work has is to make money working. And so I just caution you, beware of your work friends, because as resources become more limited, or at least the perception that resources are becoming more limited, it creates a scenario where people start to compete for those limited resources. So think of something that's short. So you don't have enough, there's not enough money. So then people compete for the money. You're playing a sports game and there's a certain amount of points. So people start fighting for the point. You try to score more buckets because only one person can win. Well, that's how people's mentalities are at work. And a lot of times when you have your work friends, they're okay and everything's good. You're going out drinking, you're partying, you're dating, and all these different types of things that play out. But when the shit hits the fan, now people are looking out for what's best for them and their family. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's at the risk of going after somebody else that's on the work team. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't have work friends. I just say keep those in check and be aware of those, because the other side, and what I recognized in my career, is that a lot of people would align themselves with me, not because they like me. I like to think I'm a likable guy, but they would align themselves with me because in my position, I was able to influence and impact a lot of change. And I had to recognize that. Had I not recognized that, it would have been a whole different issue. And I'll tell you, my last role, again, I've mentioned that this organization was it just had a culture that to me was incredibly toxic, in that, you had a kind of group of an in crowd and people were cutthroat and all that, but nobody talks about it, and the people get used to it, people manage. And so people get used to the dysfunctionality of it. And I had people coming to me like, hey, we could be, what's the song? Why can't we be friends? So I started to become cool with people, but I realized that because I was in a role that I had to make decisions that sometimes were different than what people wanted to do, because whether it was illegal or from a process perspective or just bad business practice or bad for the employees, then they would get upset and then try to undercut me. So I had one guy, for example, that me and him, we were pretty cool. We were doing okay. And then all of a sudden I find out from somebody that works for me, this guy tried to cut behind me, and he brought in another employee, and they are another one of the members of the executive team, and they tried to cut me from behind. They tried to get the person that reported to me to lie to me about something they didn't do, to say that I did it, so that way I had to take the heat from it, and it didn't work. But my point is I thought we were friends, and so at that point I realized this is who I'm dealing with. And so just beware, keep your eyes open, because it's like they say, I kind of like being poor because I know what my friends are here for. And unfortunately at work, a lot of times it's everybody's there for a reason that's other than making friends and camaraderie and those types of things. And also remember that your boss is your boss. We all like to think that our bosses are friends, and we have this illusion that organizations are like families, and yeah, incredibly dysfunctional families. I had a boss that aligned themselves with people, and even though they knew and would verbalize that the other person's wrong, it was in the best interest of the organization to keep it quiet. And so to me, that didn't work, because I think it's really important to operate within my own truth. In fact, I was having a conversation with my sister today, and we were talking about how important it was to operate within your truth and how vindicated you feel as a person by living within your own truth. And so I've always been one that focuses, on the truth, but not all organizations like that. Or as my wife would tell me, not everybody's you. And so a lot of times the boss will do things and let me know, because I know there's a lot of those experiences out there. So let me know, tell me in the comment, let me know in the comments what you think. But there's a lot of times that the boss will make a decision that's a bad decision, not because they think it's the right decision, but because politically or whatever the reason is, they feel like they need to do that. And sometimes that comes at your detriment. So just understand that, and some of us have cool bosses. So I'm not taking away from the cool bosses, but I'm just saying, keep your eyes open because everybody's cool until they're not. So you just want to understand your boss is your boss. Your boss isn't your friend. Your boss doesn't need to know all your problems. I have friends that go and tell their bosses everything thinking they're being transparent. Well, when was the last time their boss came to you and talked to you about their personal problems? Think about that for a second. And it's not because the relationship is because they're your boss. They're not your friend. They recognize that, you don't. So number 4, document your accomplishments. We all do a lot at work, and I if I went out right now, if I'm looking at you, if I'm looking at everybody out here in the YouTube universe, and I ask you, I said, are you busy? Are you doing stuff? Oh yeah, I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff. You need me. I got to do this. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. Well, here's the reality of it is if I said, okay, write down or list for me right now 10 things that you've done in the last year, you might come up with 2 or 3. You might come up with the big ones, but you don't recognize and remember everything. I know, for example, I would go into organizations and I would always have a 100-day plan, and there were things that I want to do. In my first 100 days, I would assess the organization, assess the culture, assess the people working there, do a full assessment. I would have a list of things that I want to do. And then every year I go back and assess other things that need to continue to improve. But if you ask me right now, well, what are the things that you accomplished? I can say, well, I raised wages and I created fairness and equity. But I can't go into those specific things. But when people at the time would look at the things that were accomplished, they were incredibly impressed because they're saying, how could one person do all of those things? Now, I will say that I didn't do them all alone. I did them as a team, but I was facilitating the movement of these things. And so you want to always be able to articulate your value. And we all know what our value is internally, but unfortunately, when you're in a work situation, knowing what your value is internally isn't going to help you as much as knowing what your value is in terms of what you deliver and being able to articulate that clearly. So it's best to document those so that way you have them, you know what you did. And if you have, again, a manager coming in because times are tight and they're trying to manufacture some stuff, you need to be ready with this information. You got to come correct, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in a bad spot. Number 5, and this is one, it's hard for me to say this because I think it's important to understand a few pieces of this, but HR is not your representative. A lot of people think that you have unions and you have HR, but if you step back, who negotiates against the union? It's going to be your HR department. So think about this for a second. You have a union, you have an HR department. And if you're in a non-union shop, then you think, well, I don't have a union, so HR is my friend. But what HR's job is to do is to help mitigate risk for the organization. HR's whole job is to help mitigate risk. Now, there are different ways to mitigate risk. I always like to think that prevention was the best medicine. So if you can prevent issues, if you could create environments where you treat people fairly, where you train your folks, you pay people fairly, you give them opportunities to advance, and you manage the managers that are creating toxicity in their work environments, then what you're going to have is you're going to have more engaged employees. You're going to have fewer lawsuits and fewer litigation. But unfortunately, it's not like that for a lot of HR organizations. And I would ask, maybe I'll put out a poll or something, but how many of you out there, non-HR people, that are still working, have a positive impression of your HR person? And why is that? And it's because HR is not seen widely as a department that's there for the people. It's seen as a political department. It's seen as a department that's there to cover managers' bad behavior and of the sorts. And so I think that if we understand that HR is not our representative, then what we're not doing is we're not going into HR with a bunch of personal stuff or entrusting HR with a bunch of information that's going to hurt us. I used to tell people this when they said, "Can you keep this confidential?" I would say, unless I'm legally obligated to disclose it, I won't disclose it. And the things I'm legally obligated to disclose are things that deal with issues of violence, issues of child abuse, because I was a mandated reporter for my healthcare organizations that I was responsible for, and sexual harassment. So if there's like harassment, sexual harassment, or something like that, you're legally required to do it. So you can't keep that incognito. But most other things, if you came to me, I just wouldn't tell anybody. And I knew a lot about a lot of people. And I used to say that a good HR person is like the consigliere in the mob. They know what's happening, but they're not necessarily putting people out there on Front Street. But you're helping people through it. And then if I try to help you through it, and you don't follow my advice and something bad happens, I can't help you then. It's like, what's the song say? I tried to help you all I can, but I can't do nothing for you, man. I was known as a guy that can help fix things. If you ever saw Better Call Saul, the TV show, I was kind of like Saul Goodman, but I wasn't shady. For example, we had a situation where we had a hospital. We were one of the few hospitals in downtown San Francisco. They bought another hospital in San Francisco. And so the security team said, look, we're losing all of these people to this other hospital because the other hospital's paying more. Now, folks, we're all overworked and underpaid. But what I did is I got the information and I did the research, understood that that was the case, and went straight forward to my boss, who was the CEO of the hospital, and said, look, you have a choice here. You can either continue doing what you're doing and not have any security guards. You get the lowest paid security guards, which may not give you the most safety and security, and that's what was paramount in a place like San Francisco. Or you give these folks a $2 an hour increase and increase your budget by the amount of what you spend on your incremental budget for other stuff, for parties and travel expenses. So, and so he changed it. And so, but my point being is, by going to my CEO with that information, it's like, look, if you want to prevent a mutiny, here's what you do. For that manager that came to me with the issue of the other hospital, if you want me to go to my boss with information, and here's the information that I need, so I could research, and they brought me all of that. So a good HR person is going to really seek to try to figure out, how do you win? But at the end of the day, an HR representative is not a union representative. And that's something that you need to know. You really have to understand that. What happens a lot of times is that the moment things go sideways, people go to HR and they start complaining about the managers. And then what do you think HR does with that information? Well, people in departments that aren't typically liked a lot of times will try to create scenarios where people like them. And the number one way to try to get people to like you is to provide information that they wouldn't have normally had. And so a lot of times HR does that. And I hate to say it because I was an HR professional, but it was just different. It was, I operated different. I moved different. But again, that's why I'm the unicorn. I'm the 53-year-old black dude that's retired from human resources, because I did things different. I moved different. And unfortunately, you can't, as Muhammad Ali said, you can't stick your hands in a box of snakes and try to grab the ones that are the good ones, because you'll still get bit by the other ones, and you might be wrong. And then the last one is, leave on your own terms. I've been watching the news, and several weeks ago, there were these conversations that were happening in the federal government where they were saying, you can give you the opportunity to resign and do these mass resignations and so on. Here's the bottom line is you've got to make them do the work. And here's what I mean. So in order to lay off, there's a lot that goes into, in general. Now, I know with the government, there hasn't been, but in general, there's a lot of conversation and there's a lot of work that goes behind layoffs in a hospital. At least in the hospitals I worked in, because it was really important to me that we protected as many people as we could protect. But make them do the work. If I come to a group of people and say, how many of you want to just get laid off and get $5,000 or whatever the number is, then there's going to be people that raise their hand. But those people are then going to go out and find that, oh, wait a minute, the road outside of Pleasantville is rocky and full of potholes. And so make them do the work. If they think you're a performance issue or they don't like you, make them fire you, because you have recourse if they fire you or if they lay you off illegally, but you don't have recourse if you resign. That's why they wanted all those people to resign. You see how that works? And so make them do the work. And I'll give you an example of the work. So when I was at a hospital, I was working at one hospital, and they had to do some layoffs because we just, we weren't profitable. And we said, who do we lay off? And in healthcare, it's incredibly critical that you get it right, because you have to have enough of the right people doing the right job in the right place in order to provide patient care. Because if you screw that up, people die. It's that simple. And so the first thing I said was, and we had a bunch of union contracts and it was all convoluted, so I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole. But what I did is I took a look at the hours that everybody worked from point A to point Z and was able to compare. You had people that were working a lot of hours. You had people that were working no hours. You had some people that were eligible to work, but they chose not to work. And so you have like your per diem people and so on. And you have some of your real low hour part-time people and so on. And so if you can move those people off the books, then you understand what that impact is, because a person that comes into a hospital and is only working 8 hours generally is going to have other jobs. And so if they have other jobs, then this job is not necessarily the one that they use as the primary to feed their families. However, you take something that's 40 hours a week, well, guess what? Now what you've done is you've taken their bread and butter out from under them. So if you're going to remove somebody's bread and butter, you better make sure you do it right, because at the end of the day, everybody has a right to feed their family. And I believe that 100%. And unfortunately, a lot of times managers won't go down that path unless your HR people are pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and have the credibility to be listened to. But again, there's work behind that, and it's not easy and it's not fun. But then what you start to realize is people in general are better off because you made the decision that had the least amount of pain. Because sometimes there's always going to be pain when there's a situation like that, but you always want to, try to mitigate as much of that pain as possible. So those are the six things that I think you can do to protect yourself at work during turbulent times. Because again, organizations, not everybody is going to keep it a buck like your man Sabato and just come with the information. What you're going to get a lot of is you're going to get managers that are passive aggressive and use this as an opportunity to slight you because you pissed them off because you didn't come in for that overtime shift or do something they wanted you to do on your personal time. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to protect yourself, because then they'll manufacture a narrative and you don't want that to happen. So the 6 steps, again, are number 1, requesting a copy of your employee file and making sure that some of the key pieces of information are received. Copies of the disciplinary actions, copies of your performance appraisals, and copies of your training certificates. Number 2, you want to review your policies. You want to make sure that if they're going to do layoffs, that you understand to the degree that you can, what's their process? How are they going to lay people off? What's their methodology? How do they get there? And what's their rehire policy? If they're going to rehire people, is there a process in place for me to get my job back? And unfortunately, in a lot of shops that aren't union shops, you don't have that. But in some organizations, you do. And you'd be surprised. So I would ask those questions. Number 3, keep your personal information personal. We all want friends. What's that song? Why can't we be friends? We all want friends. We all want connections. None of us want to be on an island. But you got to be careful when you're dealing with people at work. You know, a lot of people smile in your face, but behind your back, they just want to take your place. And you want to make sure that you protect yourself. And the number one way you protect yourself is by limiting the information that you give other people, and understand that your boss is your boss. A lot of times people will become friends with the boss because they think that is going to save them. And so you become friends with the boss because you think that's going to save you. And they use that same information you gave them thinking they were your friend against you. And you find yourself in a bad situation. So understand that your boss is your boss. Document all your accomplishments. You've got to document your accomplishments. Unless you have a laser sharp memory, and you may also want to add some of the sub bullets under that in terms of what it is that you what the outcomes of those accomplishments were specifically, and what that did for the long term of the organization. So as they start thinking about, well, we're just going to let you go, they start to think about, well, how valuable you were. And what you're finding that now with a lot of the government layoffs, the federal government is bringing a bunch of people back because they realize they screwed up. I think it's the Department of Human Services or whatever realized that 20% of their RFK Jr.'s stuff, they realized that 20% of the people that they got rid of, they were by mistake. So it's because you start to lose the value of the historical knowledge and so on. And so, but if you forget that you brought that value, then nobody else is going to remember that. Number 5, just remember that HR is not your representative. They're just not. There are good HR people out there. I would like to say that I think I was one of them. I think I did a good job of really advocating for people because I'm just not about the bullshit. But unfortunately, that's just not the case with everybody. Sometimes people take those jobs in order to have some power. Sometimes people take those jobs because they think they're administrative, which they're not. And sometimes people just take the job because they think, oh yeah, this is my chance to work with people and plan parties. Well, folks, I've planned parties. I hate doing it. I'm never going to do it again. But I had to do it. But at the end of the day, not every HR person is there to really advocate for what's right. And if you focus on what I consider to be an objective truth, then you're doing the right thing regards to the situation. And sometimes regardless of how it's going to impact me. I'll give you another example. I had a person that worked for me once that was making less than I was, but was being paid unfairly. And I was being paid unfairly. And my boss was dancing around and playing games and manipulating. Well, he thought he was manipulating me, but that's a whole nother conversation. And so I ended up giving this person, because it's the right thing to do, I got this person more money. And for a short period of time, this person was making more money than me. Not because I was afraid of anything, but because it was the right thing to do. If I were in that situation, I would want a boss with the cojones to stand up for what's right. And that's what happened. And so this person is now in a significantly better place than they were before I got there, at least financially. And number 6, and the last one, is just leaving on your own terms. Make them do the work. Don't let them come into your office and say, hey, which of you want to go? Make them make you go. Make them do the work. Make them do the analysis. Make them sweat if they are just doing it willy-nilly, because they know that legally there's going to be some risk. And so you retain your right to retain counsel and litigate the matter and potentially have them do right by you. So, but if you just agree to everything, then you find yourself in a spot where you've resigned. It's almost like a false confession. It's hard to overturn a false confession if all the other pieces are done right. It's hard to litigate a wrongful termination if you resigned. And so if you get people to resign, guess what? And a lot of times what'll happen, and find somebody that's resigned, on there in lieu of termination. And a lot of times what you'll find is that same person got some type of, or not in lieu of termination, but in lieu of them being laid off, or whatever the case is, what you'll find is they usually got a release of claims. And the reason that you sign that release of claims is because it releases the claims from the employer for future litigation. So don't make it easy for them, because at the end of the day, they're not making it easy for you by laying you off for some wrong reason or some ill-found reason. If it's really worth doing it, then do it right. It's like I was talking to somebody today, and it was a great statement. I don't care if you tell people what I said, because I said it. And if I said it, then it is what it is. And that makes a lot of sense to me. The reality is that makes a lot of sense, because you said what you said, and you have to deal with the consequences. We'll make them deal with the consequences of their decisions. And if their decision was the right decision, they'll stand behind it. If the decision was a bad decision, then they're going to have to pay for it. That's the bottom line. So on that note, I would just ask that, I hope you like the content. If you like this content, you could feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you as part of the community, because about once a week, we talk about things that I think are pertinent for all of us. But I would also ask that, what are some of the things on your mind? What are you thinking? What's happening with you? There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot from a early retirement perspective that's happening. Those of you that are on track to retire early, I talk in another video about, the managing your portfolio and trying not to panic. But what's on your mind? And leave it in the comments. And I generally will draw up some content around those comments. So, because at the end of the day, it's not about me, it's about you. And it's about me taking my experience and using my experience to help the world become more informed about something that may help them. And if one of you out there are able to be helped by the information I shared, then I've done my job. I won't stop the channel, because then I'll focus on having number 2. So on that note, have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon.